Hi, and welcome to the Leadership Development Armory Lesson 16. We are going to be going through a series where we look at understanding the different types of people groups that youth leaders will interact with. Today, we'll be hearing from Jim Sparks about understanding youth leaders. Please be mindful that because this video was recorded on Zoom, the quality of the audio and visuals isn't great, but the quality of the content is exceptional. We hope that this lesson is of value to your ministry. Please enjoy.
And welcome back to the Leadership Development Armory. My name is Summer Bussey, and I'm the Christian Education Director for the Western Territorial Youth Department. And we're back again with our third season of the Armory, and we've been meeting for the last couple weeks and talking about, it's basically been a series about understanding the different types of people groups that youth leaders interact with. And it's ranged from primary kids all the way through officers. And we've heard from just different people in our department who have been subject matter experts. So today we have Jim Sparks back again, who is going to be talking about understanding youth leaders. And while we know that this is a training for youth leaders, it's also important. Oftentimes we have other officers and various other types of leaders join. And so it's important for our pastors to understand you as youth leaders. But also it's important for you as a youth leader to maybe get some relief in the knowledge that you're not alone in certain feelings. And so we just hope that this is a good opportunity for just some discussion and just for you to be able to share and feel affirmed in what it means and what it's been like to be a youth leader. So Jim is going to be speaking on this topic, and Jim is our Territorial Director of Youth Ministry. He served in our department for over 20 years, and he started teaching Sunday school at age 16, which actually included 10 to 12-year-olds. So he started out with a very crazy, rough, scary place. So brave of him to stay in youth ministry after that. And he's been a volunteer youth leader at the Pasadena Corps since he was a teenager, and has worked professionally with youth leaders doing training for about 25 years. So just as a reminder of why we even do this, we want the Armory to be a place for diligent learning in order to develop and equip youth leaders. And we want this to be a safe space to learn new things, ask questions, and make connections with other leaders in the Salvation Army. So we're really excited to hear from Jim about this group, but let me just pray to open us up. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for this day and for this time that we get to come and we get to learn. Lord, I pray that you would just open up our minds and our hearts to just hear what you may have to say and what we may be able to learn so that we can grow in our ministry, God. We thank you so much for all of the youth leaders around the territory and honestly around the world, Lord, who have committed their lives to serving in this way. And Lord, I just pray that for each person that watches this video, that attends our Zoom sessions, that just even reads one of our infographics, Lord, that they may be able to grow in their understanding of what it means to be a youth leader, Lord, so that we may better serve our kids, Lord, and just do it for your glory. So we just thank you so much. I pray that you bless Jim as he speaks, and bless all those that receive this information in your name. Amen.
Amen. Yes, I had 6 10 to 12-year-old girls. That was my first Sunday school class. I had no training going into it other than I worked at camp. I guess that's a little bit of training. And those girls taught me more than anything I could ever have taught those girls. And prepared me for nothing since I only had boys growing up. I only had sons. Anyways. Cool. Let's get right into it. Who are youth workers? What are they? What are these creatures that we call youth workers? Let's start with the stereotypes. They're typically what? Young. That's what everyone thinks, that they're young. Although some of the best youth leaders I've ever seen are older. In fact, one, I will say right off the top, was YPSM in Portsmouth Citadel Corps in the south of England. And her name was Auntie Anne, and she was in her 80s, and no one could match her energy, enthusiasm, and care. She was amazing. So stereotypes that they're young, a lot of energy. Oh, look at you guys go with your energy. They're often seen as tech support for the Corps or for anyone. That doesn't mean that they know what they're doing. but that's generally their a default there. Um, they're a clown, just an entertainer, just someone that's taking care of the kids. It's just making them laugh the entire time. Um, Not naive because they're young. They don't know. They're naive. They don't know. Um, they are unhealthy. And by meaning that is every youth worker has had to deal with, you guys just eat, drink Mountain Dew and eat licorice all day long. And it's always like weird snack related stuff that youth workers get accused of eating and drinking. And honestly, there's a reason why stereotypes exist because a lot of that does actually happen. In many ways, they're an adopted parent for one of the youth. And then another stereotype that I've written down here is disorganized and late, typically. And I don't know if that's true, but I could tell you it's harder to get our meeting started on time at the Territorial Youth Leaders Conference. More than anything else that we do. It's harder to get those meetings on time. I just think that's people fellowshipping and enjoying each other and not paying attention to the time. But I also think it's timeliness is an issue for some. And cool and hip. Now, I've never been accused of this. Maybe some of you have been accused of being cool and hip. But if you've been in any one of my workshops before, I'll tell you right now that you're not cool and you're not hip, generally by most people. So those are the stereotypes. Those exist for a reason. I'm sure there's other ones. If you have some other stereotypes, feel free to put those in the text of what the youth workers are. But while you're doing that, youth workers in the Salvation Army are called many different things. So you have your paid youth workers, which there's a lot less of nowadays. And I think the last I checked, there was about 45. Yeah, I have that down here. You're cool, and whoever Southern Cal Youth Department is, I'm sure you're cool. And so we have paid youth workers, and then we have volunteer youth workers, and then we have voluntold youth workers. Those are under dictatorship regimes that are just chosen and told that this is what you're going to do. So you're basically broken up into three categories in that. I being a paid youth worker is a lot, like I said, a lot more rare nowadays. But we have hundreds and hundreds and maybe even thousands of volunteer youth workers in the Western Territory. And that could be doing anything from teaching in Sunday school like I did, or even just volunteer calling people and to see how they're doing and checking in on people. There's a large range of volunteer opportunities for volunteer youth workers. So that's kind of it. What is the makeup of a youth worker? Well, according to studies, the average age youth workers varies greatly. Really depends on the organization. But some studies show that it's in the 20s and others in the 30s. According to the 2024 Youth Worker Compensation Report, the average showed a response of 34 years of age. That was their age, their average for that. I would guess in the Salvation Army, it would probably be a little bit less than that. And that's just judging based off our registrations that we typically will get for a youth leaders conference. I haven't actually done a study on it. I would like to do a study on it, and I should do a study on it. But for the nationwide, the average is probably right around 34. That seems about right. In that same compensation report, it showed a jump in women youth workers in this last year, and that jumped up 7.2% compared to the previous years. It's something I've always found fascinating is a lot of times your younger youth leaders typically are female, and then you get the males tend to jump in when it becomes a paid youth worker position. This isn't the case always, but there's a trend that I see. And but what weirds me out and trips me out is most of the youth worker books, how to be a good youth worker, all that stuff. Most of them are written by males. And luckily, over the past, I don't know, 5 or so years, we've seen a lot more females in there writing more books, and that's a good thing. We want that. But big jump last year for women in this report. And our demographics, most of our youth workers, paid youth workers, are female, and for the Western Territory, and probably most of our volunteer youth workers. Generally, at the Youth Leaders Conference, I would say it's about a 65% ratio of female to male. So, I guess if you're a single male, then that's a conference you would like to go to. I'm just saying. The trend for the Western Territory really is to gone away from the youth worker / youth pastor title and more towards core ministry assistant. We see much more of that nowadays. I suspect that's done to gain more flexibility in that position, and so that position could be involved in other things like anything from kettles to League of Mercy, and have that as more opportunities. But that is a trend that I've definitely seen in the last 5 years. It started kind of right before COVID. And then when COVID hit, unfortunately, a lot of youth workers disappeared during that time. Their positions disappeared, but as they're coming back, I'm seeing more and more core ministry assistants posted. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm old. League of Mercy. It is CCM. Yes. I can't get that vernacular out of my brain. But we're seeing much more of it, core ministry assistant, and I see the pros and I see the cons in that. But I'm just glad that people are getting hired. And generally, when they get hired as a core ministry assistant, excuse me, it is for youth ministry. Very rare is a core ministry assistant not working with youth ministry. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't seen much of that at all. Like I said, at the last count, there was around 45 paid youth workers / core ministry assistants employed in the territory. That number is rising, which is nice. A couple divisions recently have made a push to get paid youth workers into our core, and that's a good thing. But like I said, unfortunately, a lot of positions disappeared during the pandemic. The strengths of who youth workers are, just about every youth worker has a preferred age group that they like to work with. Most youth workers prefer the teenage group. That's generally the preference. And then the second would be primary school kids, the younger kids. And then there is a smaller group that somehow wants to work with middle school kids. That's their preference. I fall into that category. I love that age group. I think if I went into an order of preference, mine would probably be middle school, high school, young adults, and then primary school. I don't mind primary school at all. In fact, I really enjoy it. It's just not nearly as natural for me as the other ones might be. So knowing this, that there's always going to be a preference when youth workers get a job, come in. You want to kind of sort that out quick and then figure out how do you build around that, because there's not a person that is great at all of this. That person, that's a unicorn that doesn't exist. Now there's people that are really good at a lot of those, but that's their expertise. Their expertise is always going to fall into one of those categories. And so that's something that you'll want to be mindful of and build around. So what makes a good youth worker? Care, and this honestly could go with anything, with all of our jobs, but this has been a lot from my observation and from my own experience. But care is really a high priority. A genuine concern for the well-being and development of young people is paramount. When youth workers deeply care about everyone they encounter, it not only enhances their job performance, but also fosters trust and connection with the youth they serve. Kids know when their youth worker cares about them. Kids know when their youth workers are in it for the right reasons. And what's kind of cool about youth workers, you're kind of only in it for the right reasons because the pay doesn't really match up with the passion. And so generally they're there for the right reasons, but kids know right away if you're there for the right reasons, if you care. And youth workers that have a high capacity to care, not only care for the young people, but they care about their work performance as well, and are generally good workers. And so that is a quality that you're after in a youth worker, and that's what makes a good youth worker. The next that I would suggest is preparedness. Effective time management and thorough preparation contribute to the success of youth programs, sermons, activities, games, all of that stuff. Being well prepared gives confidence. Confident youth workers are prepared youth workers, and it's very obvious which ones fall into that category. Uh, Youth workers that use the term buddy, we will get to that in a minute. Um, my absolute favorite and ultimate tell that they are not prepared is we have a secret prize available for you at the end. Rare is there an actual genuine secret surprise. That secret surprise is generally, I'm going to make that up as I go. I still haven't figured that out. And hopefully you will forget about it, which kids don't forget about it. But preparedness is a youth worker that shows up, lets the kids know the objectives of what's going to happen, what they're shooting for, what they're aiming for, and how they're going to get there. Empathy makes a very good youth worker, and empathy is understanding the experiences, feelings, and challenges of the young people. It's about knowing what's going on in their friendship world, in their social world, in their family world, and their school world. It's knowing all that stuff and digesting that information so that you could be empathetic in times of need, times of and downtimes maybe for them. It's an opportunity for you to be able to move things in a different way. I know when I'm working with certain students, I know I have to move at different paces for them, working at different speeds and using different languages. So that way I could get them to be on page with everybody else and understand, and just having that empathy. Relational, obviously, is a huge one, and building strong connections and relationship with young people is at the heart of the youth work, whether through, like, you have your youth workers that are Pied Pipers, right? The ones that are coming in that they everyone loves them immediately, and they have a gift. And that's a good thing. But it's also could hide a lot of things, and they may not be good at relationships. So you want to be very mindful that they might be a Pied Piper and are very exciting, but they may not know the kids' names in your youth group. They may not know the information. They may not know the deeper level stuff. They're just very charismatic and easy to follow. Then you have your introverted ones that you think aren't talking to them, but they may have a deep relationship with each one of their kids because they are communicating in a very different way. So you want to be mindful of not just jumping to a conclusion there either. It doesn't matter, extroverted or introverted. What you're looking for is relational. Kids that are connecting on a relationship, that care, and it's a supportive and a nurturing environment. And then the last quality that I've written down is awareness, assertiveness. Being aware of emotions, needs, and dynamics within the youth community allows youth workers to navigate situations with sensitivity and assertiveness. Like you want in a youth worker someone that is going to recognize that that Stephen has been extra quiet today, and that's very unusual. And so they're going to want to find out why Stephen is extra quiet. They're going to want to recognize that Janet hasn't actually participated in any of the games recently, and maybe because she has a learning disability that doesn't allow her to understand the games properly, so she's embarrassed to play. An aware youth worker will be aware of the dynamics of what's going on and be able to drill into that, so that they can make it a very supportive environment. And then aware of, so one of the pitfalls that some youth workers have is because they're not parents, that they don't understand why parents are getting frustrated with them, because of things that they've programmed and the amount of things that they've programmed. And so having a strong awareness of what families have to deal with is a very strong suit, and that's something that you'll want to work with your youth workers on, as far as having awareness of what home life is like with people with kids. So here's a question for you guys. What are some qualities that makes a good youth worker that you would share?
I think that there's value in creativity, like maybe not necessarily like, create like where it's like artsy, but like somebody who can think outside of the box and not just necessarily like find, oh, okay, like I think about like I help teach like creative kids, and it's like, a couple of the girls that don't go to band, and they come and they we do crafts, and it's like most of the time, you could easily find some of those like regular crafts that are like kid crafts, but it's like by like being creative and considering like what are the kinds of projects that are currently popular that maybe they're seeing on like Instagram, and then utilizing some of those things, like by being a little outside of the box within it. I think that that helps kids, because then they're like, oh, they're really thinking about it, you know?
Yep. What else? What else makes a good youth worker?
I think I don't know if you guys can hear me or not.
Yep.
I think that like probably the best youth workers I've had as a young person were the ones that actually wanted to hang. Like I know that usually is like one of those weird indicators, for some people if you want to hang out with kids, you've got some kind of problem. But with youth workers, if they don't want to hang out with kids, they've got a bigger problem.
Yeah.
And so it's the ones that were engaged, they wanted to know how your school was. They actually had real questions, kind of like you were saying, last session before, where you're asking specific questions that aren't, necessarily school, but what was the weirdest thing that happened today, or what was the funniest thing you saw today? Those kind of weird questions and those kind of engaging moments were probably more important to me than any amount of in-class lessons that I did as a young person.
Yeah. It's good. Anybody else have a thought what makes a good youth worker?
I think for me, it's been consistency, just being consistent with the kids and asking how they are, and just wanting to be consistent in their lives. Because I find, like, for me, my best youth worker was always consistent,
Hmm.
asking about things that, maybe going on at home, and stuff like that. So, consistency.
That's good. The For the longest time, it was reported the average lifespan of a youth worker is 18 months. A paid youth worker is 18 months. But I've been reading recently that that's actually getting a little bit longer. And so to speak to the consistency is, if you're looking for a youth worker, you want someone that is in it for the long run, that this is their passion. For the longest time, youth workers, that was a stepping stone type mentality position particularly outside the Salvation Army, but this happens a lot inside the Salvation Army, where why don't you be a youth worker first before you become a Corps officer and go into there. And outside the Salvation Army, most senior pastors started out as youth pastors. But there was a shift many years ago of, hey, youth work is a career. It is a passion, and because kids do like that consistency and need that consistency and grow with them. So that's a very good point, Kevin. Anything else? All right, I will move on. If you could throw it in the chat if you'd like. So how do we support youth workers? Well, the easiest thing is to know them. That's kind of the topic of this, is get to know them. So the very things qualities that I shared with you about what makes a good youth worker, it makes a good supervisor of youth workers. Someone that cares. Do you know what your youth worker is going through? Have you had good talks with them? Do you understand their social dynamics? Do you understand all of the stuff that we're asking them to do for young people? It's no different than being a youth worker. Now, there are some things as a boss that you don't really need to know and you shouldn't be asking. Obviously, there's boundaries there. But being just going through those, being caring for your youth worker, looking out for them regularly, and being their champion, being their support, it goes a long way. Being prepared means being on the same page as youth workers is a great deal of support for them. And then empathy, relational awareness, all that stuff falls in line with being a supportive youth worker. I'm shocked at how many youth workers over the years have shared with me how many times their officer has not been seen involved in their youth programs at all. And the most shocking one came to me, this was several years ago, many years ago now, that it was a youth group, probably about 70, 75 kids in this youth group, and it was thumping every Friday night, man. It was a big, big deal. And the youth worker there was talking to them, and we were having lunch, and I said, how often does your core officer speak at your youth group? And he's like, my officer hasn't ever been to youth group in 2 years. Never once even put their face in there. And that speaks volumes to the youth worker. And it says to that youth worker, and it said to this youth worker, they didn't care. They weren't of value. And what they're doing was nice, but it wasn't of value. And so one year I solicited burnout email letters. If you were burning out, write a letter. And I don't know what prompted me to do this. I can't remember, but I have a few of them still. And overwhelmingly, the youth workers that wrote these letters cited just a pure lack of support from their officers or their supervisor, whoever they may be, just lack of support and kind of not understanding how much work that actually they are doing and how much is involved in that. And so if you're on the other end of that, if you're supervising a youth worker, you have to be able to recognize that, because the last thing we want is burnout and they leave. That's something that we want to actively avoid. You can't leave them on an island. Invest in the youth worker's personal growth and work with your youth worker on goals. If they have areas of growth that classes can help with, get them into classes. Work with them on the personal stuff to add what I call resume builders. And then people always get a little bit nervous with that. They get really nervous with me saying build resume builders because you don't want to lose your person. But that's really what you're doing. You build a resume. We're all building a resume. And so you want to keep adding on to it. Even with our own group here, I'm always encouraging, learn something new, and let's find a way to learn something new. So invest in their personal growth. Find the areas that they're looking to grow in. Maybe the youth worker is terrible with finances. Invest in that and work with them so that they're more well-rounded, so that eventually when they do leave, then they can look back and say, hey, my officer here was amazing. And really, honestly, they're the ones that charted my course for me. They helped me guide my path. And or I've got this youth group completely organized and self-sufficient because of the influence of my previous officer or my current officer that is invested in me. So invest in their personal growth. And this means doing actual annual reviews and being connected with your youth worker and having that relationship. That's the only way to know. Be mindful of their salary, and especially for like longtime employees. I was talking to a youth worker recently, and they were very frustrated with their smaller salary, and they had a very small salary, and they felt the only way for them to get an increase was to quit and then apply for their position again, which would potentially give them a raise. We have to be mindful of that. In the show links, or show, why is show links? The chat link, chat group, whatever we want to call it. I just put in the compensation youth pastor report that I was talking to you about earlier. This is not Salvation Army. This is all around, but gives you an idea. The average salary is $54,000 for a youth worker in the nation. So that's for you to take a look at. If I remember correctly, they even have it by regions too, because that plays a major role in it. But be mindful of that. Sometimes if you are not, if you have not been around salaries or salary increases, or that's been part of your life, because you might be, exempt or special exempt, or maybe an officer, you tend to forget what's going on in kind of the current state, and that happens on occasion. So be aware of that, and also be aware when looking for a youth worker. Some of the job descriptions that are posted, comparison to the salary, are very imbalanced. I see people looking for a master's degree of divinity and a youth worker, and they're offering $36,000 a year. Those don't work together like that. And so we want to be making sure we're matching those things up properly. And then lastly, what we could do to show support for our youth workers is, again, reflect all the qualities that I highlighted above. Really, I think it could be easily just said that youth workers just want you to champion them. They want you to champion the work that they're doing. They want your support, and they want your partnership. It's not an us versus them. I know Major Emmanuel Masonga was talking about we're in this together, and youth workers believe the exact same thing. We want to be in this together. And so don't lose sight of them, and don't take youth workers for granted. Being a youth workers are genuinely passionate people that care deeply for young people to know Christ and to live out a strong life of faith. In our department here, we want everyone to develop into lifelong followers of Jesus. And we believe that every youth worker has that same passion. That's why they're getting into it. It's certainly not for the money. So it has to be for the passion of changing lives. And often that's a result of someone changed their life, someone invested in them, someone cared about them, and they are returning that favor. So that's it. As youth workers, they run the gamut from age to male to female to ability and care. But when we boil it all down, it's the group all shares the same passion. They want to develop lifelong followers of Jesus, and we should be supporting every step of that as much as we can. So yeah, we'll finish that right 1 minute past my due date. But any questions that you might have about youth workers? Or even comments, actually.
What was the best piece of advice that you ever got as a youth leader, Jim?
Okay, that's a great question. The best piece of advice was that they were gonna fire me. I was working at camp actually, and I was good at my job for 3 months, and 9 months, because I was working there full time, I was not good at my job. And I know that. And like, if you're not good at your job, you generally know that you're not good at your job. If you're not getting your job done, you know it's not, you're just trying to get by. And I was, and my boss at the time was an incredibly nice man that did not like having tough conversations with anyone. He he only liked to talk about positive things. And I went in for my review, and he said, well, I'm going to be honest, if camp were to call me right now and we're going to ask to interview you for maybe a camp director position, I'd say, don't waste your time. He's not organized. He's not detailed. He cannot follow through with anything. And he would not be a good fit for any of your jobs. And that came from him, and there was a deep level of respect there, but he was very raw and honest with how I was performing at that point. And I didn't even defend myself, because naturally you want to defend yourself and you're like, ugh. But the reality is and I took it and I was like, yeah, I mean, I can't defend that. And he was just very honest in that entire review, and said, I want to keep you, but you've made it very difficult for me to keep you here. And so I'm telling you this in order to keep you. And I remember walking away going, I never wanted to hear any of that. And that was the best thing that I ever heard. And from that day on, I was like, no one's going to say that to me. And I don't want anyone to say it to me. And so I guess my advice is that we do need to be honest and upfront with each other. Joel Manby actually wrote a book all about this. He's on our National Advisor Board. I think it's called Love Wins. It's love something, but talking about doing this out of love, and that supervisor did that out of love. And I became a better youth worker because of that. I was more prepared. I was more better with my time management, all that stuff, just because he was just honest with me. So rather than it just being, hey, this is what you can do, he just told me how bad I was actually being.
Sorry, I was just adding to the chat the book reference. Yep. Love Works.
Love Works. So
close. So close.
It's been a while.
Any other questions for Jim? Or if anybody else wants to share, who's a youth worker, it's the best advice that they've been given.
Well, this is a good time for me to announce that you probably be getting this soon, but the Territorial Youth Leaders Conference is happening this next January, and we want all of you to attend. And it's January 27th through the 30th, I believe. It'll take place in Mount Herman. The registration is $225. That information is coming all through your divisional headquarters. So we want you there. Yes, be yourself. Good advice.
Jim, what are 5 specific things that officers or just people who are managing youth leaders, what are 5 things that they could do, within the next month to kind of do what you're talking about of investing more in that relationship and with their youth leaders and kind of giving them that power? What do you think that some specific things?
Really, one of the easiest things that you could do is take them away from the core or whatever you're working at. Take them out to eat or just get ice cream or something, and just ask them how they're doing. Never work necessarily. Don't talk about work, but ask them how they're doing. Just how are you doing? I want to know how you are doing. There is a longing for that question from a lot of people, of just how you're doing, and checking on that. I think another one is very positive, and honest affirmations. Affirmations that are handed out on social media of saying, my youth worker is the best, woo woo, doesn't always land. I'll be honest with you. It may feel like it lands, but it feels very self-serving to a lot of youth workers that person's just chasing their own clicks and likes. But stopping them in their tracks and just saying, hey, I I saw how you were talking to Summer when she was struggling, and you're very, very good at that. And that's a great quality to have. And picking out one thing that you could go and just affirm them on will really change their day, and maybe even change that whole burnout letter that they're writing. Another thing is to ask them, is there tools, is there something that you don't have that we should look at getting to help you out? Because a lot of people are scraping by with just bare necessities. And sometimes that's out of necessitation. That's all you have. But every once in a while, they may surprise you and say, yeah, I would just like my own printer. I would just like my own printer. And surely there's a printer lying around, or someone at DHQ has one. I'm laughing because there's one right here that no one's probably used in like 4 years. Something like that. And it could be something very simple to get them. And that could help. 4 and 5, it'll come to me in a little bit. I did see, do you have any advice on youth that want to become youth leaders, but not as youth workers? Yeah. So I always advocate drafting and working on a drafting model. Drafting is in like cycling or racing, where you get behind someone and learn and allow them to take your wind. And then when you're ready to become, maybe you want to become an actual youth worker down the line, then you could do that. But otherwise, you're learning from others, for young people. So if a young person and they say, "Hey Jim, I want to become a Sunday school teacher," great. I would partner them up with another existing Sunday school teacher rather than giving the 16-year-old 6 tween-age girls. That wasn't the best thing. I mean, it was I survived it, but that wasn't the best thing. There was times where I'm like, this is ridiculous. I could easily walk away because I'm volunteering. But pair them up with one of your better youth volunteers and have them mentor them and work them in slowly. That tends to allow them to get a feel of where their strengths will be, and increase the likelihood of them staying around a lot longer. A lot of times in the Salvation Army, it's you become in charge of things way too early, for a lot of kids, and they leave. And what's interesting is in previous generations, a lot of people will just suck it up and do it. And I'd probably count myself in that and be like, well, that's what I've been told, I'll just do it. But this generation is like, no, if it's not working for me, they'll just leave. They'll just leave. And if you're kind of being mean to them, they'll just leave. That's it. And you might say, well, that's a lack of loyalty. It could be, or it's just assertive, and it's like, hey, I don't want to be part of this environment, and so I want to bounce. So I always advocate to work them in slowly.
If anybody has any other questions, you can write it in the chat. But I'll throw off another one. Yep. And I'll say, have you ever, Jim, met somebody who's a youth leader who you didn't think should be a youth leader? And what did you do about it?
So what is the second part of that question? You cut out for me.
What did you do about it?
Okay, so I have success and a lot of failure in this. There's plenty of youth leaders, hired youth workers. I was like, oh my gosh, don't hire them. And they did really well. And so what I've learned, that just because I have an idea of what a great youth worker is, doesn't always mean that that's right. I'm wrong a lot of times. And culture dictates a lot of it too. I tend to get stuck in where I've grown up and lived in Southern California, and there's a different way of life here. And so when I see someone maybe in a community that's not like mine, I'd be like, that's just not going to work, and it ends up working. And so for me, it's not rush to judgment, but to thoroughly vet those people. When it hasn't gone well, then I haven't dealt a lot with this in the core level youth workers that have been at my core have been really good. Although I did have one sit down with one and we talked it through. And I just came from it as an angle of like, hey, this is kind of what's going on. Let's see if we can work together to fix this. And I will work with you on all of that. And we had some good moments there. But I obviously haven't been a supervisor at a core and doing that, but if they're not doing well. But again, kind of going back to what someone did to me and what Joel Mamby talks about in that Love Works is if someone is not doing well, we have to be able to just say, hey, things are not going well. We've got to figure this out. And if you're doing it out of love and you have a respectful relationship and a caring relationship, then it might be difficult to hear and it may actually hurt for a little bit, but it's if they understand it's done out of love, then the chances of you seeing correction is going to be very high and there's a level of respect. And like I said, it changed my life when someone was honest with me, like for the good. I was like, I'm too young for this to happen because I think I was like 20 when that happened, maybe 21. I think it was 21. And I was like, that's just never going to happen. And to this day, I still work in a little bit of paranoia, a healthy level of paranoia, that's going to happen to me again. And because I know that I'm susceptible to that. Hey, that's a good question. As a youth worker, how can we get people to support and be invested in youth ministry? At times, I feel like I'm on an island on my own, being the only one invested in the kids. Yeah, that's very common, unfortunately. We've actually just been talking about this at the core I go to, because honestly, at the core I go to, very small amount of people are doing the youth work. And how do we get more people invested in it? One idea that was given to me a long time ago, and it just seems elementary, but it works, is to put out a thing in your bulletin of how can you be involved in youth ministry while recognizing that not everyone is called to youth ministry, and highlighting the different opportunities, kind of like a job posting of what could be available and what you would be looking for in volunteer. And this idea was given to me by Doug Fields, who is a longtime youth worker, has written a bunch of books, and he would do this every year in his at his church, and he was always surprised by the responses that he got. And so sometimes it would be like, hey, I don't want to do anything with youth ministry, but I want to be praying for you. And I'm here to pray for you. So anytime you have prayer requests, come to me. That's a new person of support that you didn't know you had. Or I can make the phone calls or send the emails or send the text messages for you, but I don't want to be involved in youth ministry because I'm scared of kids or whatever. And so you might get a lot of feedback like that. It might be an opportunity for people, because I think a lot of times in the Salvation Army, we're not very good at actually asking people to do things, just outright asking them. A lot of times we throw these like shots out there saying, hey, you can come and do that. But, that's not how you get a dance partner on a dance. You have to go and ask them. And as much as I would not like to do that, that's the only way that you're going to get them to dance with you, is to go up and actually ask them. And so by doing that, but I'll tell you a funny story that came out of that, was that this was actually Les Christie, a youth worker. He did one of these forms, filled it out, and got way more feedback than he thought. And one guy wrote, I have a boat, I have jet skis, and I have a bunch of toys that I would love to take the youth group in. I don't want to do youth ministry. I don't want anything to do with it, but this is what I have, and I would love to do that with the youth group. And so he said, great, we're going to do it. And so he thought it would be fun because he had a big youth group, so he had to kind of whittle it down a little bit. And so he said that they were going to do this big outreach project for the church there, and they were going to sand and paint the fence that goes around the church as a service project. So he did, and had people sign up. And those that signed up that morning he contacted the parents and told them that he's actually going to be taking them to the lake. So he got permission to take them to the lake, and they're not to say anything to their kid, and just tell them to wear their bathing suit and bring a towel, because there's going to be a water fight afterwards. So the kids all get there, get ready to do the mission project, and there's probably only like 13 kids there, right? And so he goes, "I've got news for you. We're not painting the fence today. Everyone get in the vans. We're going to the lake, and we're going on the boat." And they went on the boat. They jet skied. They wakeboarded. They went on all the toys. Just had a blast, absolute blast. So that was on the Saturday. You can imagine what happened on the Sunday is they were all talking about, "We didn't paint the fence, and we went to the lake, and we did all that stuff." And so then Les Christie said, "Okay, next month, the second Saturday, we're painting the fence. And so, but I need you to sign up." And he had 3 times the amount of signups to paint the fence. And he said they painted that fence in like an hour and a half with all those kids. And so he had fun with that, but he was really pointing out bait and switch is not illegal necessarily, but that he never would have known that resource was available without actually asking and getting actual feedback. And so that's really kind of the easiest way. But we really got to ask people, and if they say no, that's okay, because they may not be for them. But you could always ask a follow-up question: Is there a way that you could support us by prayer, or maybe serving a meal at one random one? Give them actual, very specific, small, low committed tasks would be an easier way to draw them in. In fact, we're actually going to be doing that at our core in the next couple of weeks. So. All right, I think that's it. Summer?
Yep, I guess that's it. I mean, we have I had one more question.
Okay.
Which is I know that question, it's a question you like to ask a lot, but what was your biggest fail as a youth leader? And then we can finish it off.
I'll be honest, most of my biggest fails happen of me not coordinating times properly. And there's been some very bad ones. One of them I actually did in our department, working for the youth department. It was for WYI. We had 250 people gonna do service projects in San Francisco. And we were driving from Camp Redwood Glen. And I told San Francisco DHQ that we would be there at 9 a.m. so that we were ready, make sure I have all those projects ready, so all the buses will be arriving at 9 a.m. And we were only going to be doing a couple hours, so it was tightly scheduled. I scheduled the buses to arrive at camp at 9 a.m. And so it meant we didn't really get to San Francisco by 11. And I remember the officer there. He's now passed away, but nicest guy. He read me the riot act, and it was 100% my fault. A giant fail. There was no way around it. And I because I learned from my lesson of working at camp, I was like, it's my fault. I scheduled it wrong. It was my fault. And a lot of that's where honesty wins for all of us, is that being able to admit, hey, that's my fault. I screwed that up. There's been smaller things that I've screwed up, where I've said the wrong thing to someone where I wasn't aware and assertive, and I've made a sarcastic joke that really offended some young people, and deeply regretted that. And like, I remember one specifically, I could feel it coming out of my mouth and I couldn't stop it. And I learned from that. And I had tough for me conversations with those kids. when I've done that. But they've been valuable for me because I'm very, very aware of that, and I don't want to do that again. Um, there's been plenty of games that didn't work, and I just laugh it off sometimes now. Sometimes I get frustrated because in my head I have this magical moment. But yeah, so I operate under the guidance that something is going to fail. I don't know what it is, but something is going to fail, and we're just going to write it out, and that's going to be okay. And so it happens a lot. I've said the wrong things several times in sermons where I've combined words that didn't make nice words, and you just laugh, and it's okay. You just deal with it.
And then on the flip side of that, like what was one of your bigger successes that you really liked? And then we'll close out.
Yeah, I will say one of the biggest successes on just a program. This actually happened at camp. I had this idea that I worked on for a long time, and it was a lot of work. And it was I took the whole camp, 200 something kids, and we were going to go on a hike together. And through this hike, there was going to be all kinds of stations that told a story. I can't even remember the story now. But I had gotten actors for it. I really went all out for this. And so we met at the campfire pit, and we had these kind of team type things that they were doing. And then we set out, and we had like a drum beating, and it was cool. It was like we were marching through the wilderness to go through all this stuff. And I was really excited. I was like, this is going to be big, and the kids are going to love it. The staff are going to be blown out of the way, because it was my first year being like an actual programmer of those type of programs. And so I was swinging, and the first group hit a beehive, ground beehive, and 35 kids got stung. I got stung as well. And it was chaos. Kids were running all over the place, all down the mountain, not on the trails, screaming. It was chaos, and it was. I mean, we had like a set up a triage area, and we're scraping beads out. An EpiPen was used on a kid. It was madness, and I was so selfish in that moment, going, "This moment is ruined. This whole evening is ruined. Lives were going to get changed by how amazing this was." And but because I was on the leadership staff, we were taking care of the kids, and I just told the head counselors, take them back to the campfire pit and just try to do a program of some sort. Whatever, just take them down there. We'll be down there in a little bit. We managed the kids, got them iced up, some Benadryl, and I could hear them singing songs kind of in the distance and stuff like that. And I went back and I just sat down in the back of the campfire pit, and it turned into one of the most meaningful campfire programs I've ever seen. And kids had talked about their fears and their joys, and it was like all these testimonies of kids and what had happened that week. This was kind of the culmination of the week, and it turned into be one of the coolest, raw, like ground up programs that was really run by the kids. And there was a lot of lessons learned for me in that day, and I will never forget that day. I thought it was cool, and I would, even with the bees, I would never forget that day. I thought it was really awesome. So anything youth led, because even just last year when we had an open testimony thing at Anthem, and generally open testimony could get a little sketchy. You never know, because people like to talk, right? And we had 65 people share their testimony, an open testimony. 65. I was just blown away. So anything youth led is good.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you everybody who came and asked questions and participated and just watched this. So we just thank you so much. In 2 weeks, we'll be meeting to understand the youth department, which is our final Armory for this season. And we just hope to see you guys then. Thank you so much. Bye.